Two-term Republican incumbent Steve Daines has a challenger. Michael Blackwolf, a Fort Belknap Indian community leader, is running for U.S. Senate as a Democrat in Montana. He joins me now. Thank you so much, Michael, for being on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate you taking the time and asking me to come on your show. Much appreciated.
So, what made you interested in running for U.S. Senate?
Yeah, when I had first started thinking about this, it was this past summer, like I would say maybe August. And so really almost it was kind of a spur of the moment. But really what triggered me to do this was, um, uh, I am a grandfather now. I have three adult children. My wife and I, we have three adult children, and we have several grandchildren now. And grandchildren, we have several granddaughters, young granddaughters as well. And so I was looking and kind of watching the politics, national politics, how they were kind of going this past summer. And we were kind of really seeing this current administration, kind of just going forward and doing things that they wanted. And really, again, for a lack of better terms, they were kind of looking like, they are pushing for essentially a world according to MAGA. And really in that world, there's no room for a lot of different things, a lot of things that if you're not MAGA, if you're not from the ultra rich or the billionaire class, it's not a conducive world for those of us that don't fit into that paradigm. And in particular, if you're a woman, ultimately you kind of see the extreme views of the billionaire class of MAGA on what they think women should be doing. To minorities of any sort, they don't want to have minorities in that world. And then three, obviously, Native people that are indigenous to North America really don't fit into that paradigm of, fitting into a world according to MAGA. And, of all those three things, those are three strikes against my granddaughters, really. And I really didn't want to see my granddaughters subjected to or growing up in that kind of an environment or that kind of a world. And as I sat and watched, didn't really see any strong voices at that time here in Montana on a national political, in a national political lens that would lend to somebody who would potentially have a fighting chance, so to speak, to run against Steve Daines. And so I had visited with my family. I visited with my spouse, my wife, my children, and we had some deep conversations over the course of several weeks. Because if as you probably are well aware, when someone decides to enter into something like this, you're basically you're opening yourself up for all kinds of everything, and and in all honesty, my both of my grandfathers were in politics on both sides of my family. One of my maternal grandfather was a tribal council member here back in his time. He was, I believe, even a tribal chairman, a tribal leader, one time. And so, the politics kind of, naturally flows in my being. And but I kind of didn't get involved in politics in any form, because of that. I wanted to shield my family, shield my wife, my children, and now my grandchildren. But I as I was looking at that, it was worth it for me to take those shots, so to speak, to take those hits in order to try to make sure and ensure that my grandchildren, particularly my granddaughters, wouldn't be subject to, the cruelties, quite honestly, of what would come in a life according to MAGA. And as you may or may not be aware, there's this movement out there called Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples. As we have one of the smallest populations per capita, Native peoples in the United States and Canada, and yet we have a higher proportion of particularly our Native women who go missing and murdered, and when they're found, they're more often than not the cases go unsolved. And so this really hits home for me personally. And when I got into this, and those that were close to me and are close to me when I got into this, that know me, they know that when I get into something or I put my mind to something, I'm in this race, and I'm in it to win it.
Would you say that your campaign is a direct challenge to the Trump administration?
I would say in certain aspects, I guess from a certain degree, you can look at it like that. But what I did is I again, like I mentioned earlier, the push that got me into this, was like the overall welfare and the future of my grandchildren. But as I really got into it, I started looking, and we really start seeing this polarization, and it has been for, the better part of 10, 20 years, maybe longer now. And it's getting more and more polarized. And so what we really need now is we need someone that's going to come in and really start to bring people back together, on both sides of the aisle, and to really try to start getting us to, start having civil meetings, to start having civil discussions. And, that's one of the beauties of our democracy is, we all have our opinion, not always going to be the same, but yet we should be able to sit down and have good civil discourse, even though oftentimes those views may differ. It doesn't mean that just because you're a particular person or a particular party's views are different from my own doesn't make me their enemy and doesn't make them my enemy.
Let's discuss your policy platform. You have several key pillars in your platform, and we'll start with economics. You want to provide incentives to keep young talent in Montana. What are some of those incentives?
I apologize, Cameron. Your part of the screen is freezing and unfreezing, and I was only hearing like every other word of your question. My apologies.
No problem. I'm going to repeat the question again. So, what are some incentives to keep young talent in Montana? It's something that you mentioned on your campaign website.
Well,
you were
sorry, Cameron. Again, you broke up. Yeah, and if I might be breaking up on your end as well. My apologies.
Yeah.
But again, I'm hearing like every other word or every third word from you. So
Okay. Yes, on your end, the screen is freezing. Can you now hear me?
we were doing good for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you now hear me?
I heard you there.
Okay, great. So on your campaign website, you mention
Yeah, you're
keeping.
freezing up again there, partner. Your screen.
Okay. I'm going to turn off my camera. Hopefully that will help, and I'll just keep you on like this. Can you
Okay.
hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So what are some you mentioned on your campaign website about having incentives to keep young talent? What are some incentives that you would put in place to keep young talent in Montana?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you. So when I was thinking about this, as I started moving, more and more into to running for United States Senate, so what we're really looking at is Montana is one of the states where we offer tremendous incentives for businesses to come, and there's a lot of tax breaks, tax, but oftentimes what those tax incentives and those tax breaks are, they are very beneficial for the very wealthy, the extremely wealthy people to come and set up shop here. And so what I was thinking is what we can potentially do is look at incentivizing some of our own native born Montanans, and incentivize them a little bit more, and to encourage them to stay here in Montana, to open up businesses, whether it's farm and ranch, or which is our number one industry in Montana, or that we do have a lot of entrepreneurial people here. So we really want to do is kind of really start keeping our young folks here in Montana. And as one of the examples I use is, for those that may watch this from Montana will know exactly what I'm talking about, the area of Montana. Highway 2 runs across, and there's a bunch of small farming, ranching communities, every 10, 15, 20 miles. And when I was a young man back in the 1980s, these were all thriving communities, and almost every one of these small towns, they've had their own respective schools, or else two neighboring towns would co-opt and create their schools, with their communities get together. And now what we're seeing is over since the 90s of last century and into the early part of this of the 2000s, we're seeing more and more people leaving and leaving our rural areas, moving to populated areas, or even just altogether leaving the state. And even though our state is growing, and we just the last census we went over, we finally broke 1 million people in population. A lot of those people are immigrating to Montana, and unfortunately, a lot of our young people, our young native-born Montanans, are moving out of state in order to be able to make livings for themselves. And so you really want to try to start looking at incentivizing young people to come back, either in farming and ranching, and look at giving them as many incentives and as much help as possible, for them to either want to, or to
Unfortunately, the last sentence got cut off on your end. Would you repeat it one more time?
Oh yeah, sorry. So again, I said, so what we really wanted to do was to try to incentivize, our young Montanans to either stay here, or else, some of our, so maybe people, my age now, that are in our 50s, and our children now are, emigrating somewhere else. We want to, maybe try to entice them to come back home to Montana.
Would you consider basic income programs, or something along the lines of what happens in a state like Alaska, where they have a universal basic income program, to maybe keep or retain individuals in Montana?
That's a great question. Honestly, I've never even honestly considered something like that. My thought has always been, in Montana, where a lot of people here, a lot of our residents, we really pride ourselves on being able to, to uh, help ourselves out as much as possible. And unfortunately, the way things are going right now, we see things like we see tax breaks. Be honest, we see tax breaks, which was like passed in the one big beautiful bill, and those tax breaks are just really just benefiting the ultra rich. So why don't we take those types of tax breaks and move them over here to the hardworking everyday Montanans to help them out. If we give our hardworking Montanans, our ranchers, our farmers, our entrepreneurs, our small business owners, we give them the tax breaks, instead of giving, all of these, quite honestly, Malta, when we're talking ultra rich, we're talking, 50 million, 100 million plus, billion, we don't have many very billionaires here in Montana, but, we do need to really strongly consider, some kind of a billionaire tax that can, those people can easily afford them, and they can, really just in turn start helping financially, like like I said, our small business owners, our farmers and ranchers, and help reinvigorate.
Let's discuss healthcare, your plan for rural healthcare. You want to expand telehealth access for rural and tribal communities. How how will you expand telehealth access while um, keeping costs low? Because telehealth you have to build an entire infrastructure to have a well-functioning system without getting hacked. So how do you expand telehealth access while having fiscal responsibility?
Yeah, I'm just going to be honest here, and like I said, one of the things that I'm running on is honesty. And so this administration and the Republican members in Congress, they've gutted our healthcare system. Again, referencing the one big beautiful bill. What it's going to do, it's going to slash the federal Medicaid spending, by an estimated $1 trillion to $1.2 trillion, not billion, $trillion. And where do those tax, those taking money away from the Medicaid and Medicare? Where's that money going? Tax breaks for the rich and billionaires. And so what I'm really going to work for is I really want to push hard to get those, get that, and those are over the next 10 years. And so really want to do is start pushing hard to get those resources back to where they are desperately needed and in dire need of, which is rural communities. And for those of you that are from Montana, and those that have not, maybe not any of your listeners have not been fortunate to come to Montana. Montana is about as rural of a state as you can get. And so, with the exception of our cities, we have 5-6 major cities in Montana. Other than that, pretty much everything else is rural. And so the importance of rural health, telemedicine, it's huge. It's huge for all of our rural communities. It's huge for all of our tribal communities. And most of our, if not all of our tribal communities are, considered rural. And so oftentimes it even just, like through Indian Health Services for most tribes, we have this ongoing battle of even just trying to recruit medical doctor to come to our rural, provide quality health care for our tribal members. And then I'm sure that you get out into the rural communities and we would pretty much find the same issues that rural Montanans face, just as much as the tribal communities do here in Montana. And so with all of these cuts that happen in this one big beautiful bill, they're the health of elders, people with disabilities, low income families, all of them are going to be affected. And so, that's one thing that I want to get out there is that, I'm here for everyday Montanans, and I'm an everyday Montanan myself. And so, I really just want to let people know that, let's get rid of, politicians who are, essentially bought and paid for by big donors, the billionaire class, ultra rich people, all these dark money political action committees. And so, we really need to refocus on, just what it is to be a everyday caring human being that cares for our neighbors. So that's one of the things that really kind of comes in, and when we're talking about we're talking about essentially common sense, and one thing that I would do is as if what I'm going to run on is this is going to be as much of a grassroots campaign as possible. I am going to, if at all possible, not take as least amount of dark money, large corporate money, donations for my campaign, because when if I'm fortunate enough to get the Democratic nomination and I am fortunate enough to beat Senator Daines, when I go to DC, I don't want to be beholden to any special interests. I want to be able to beholden to all 1.1 million residents of Montana and be able to actually work for them on their behalf.
We'll get to one more question and then you'll have a chance to say anything that you would like at the end. In terms of protecting tribal sovereignty, it's something that you value, and you mention on your campaign website about ensuring equal partnerships for tribal nations. How would you establish equal partnerships for tribal nations?
Oh, again, so that throughout the United States. And when you look at the Constitution, when you look at what is the supreme law of the land, trivia question for your followers and listeners, when you look into the Constitution, there's one thing in there that says it's the supreme law of the land, and those are treaties. And so if we have treaties between the United States government and all the tribal nations, that is the supreme law of the land. And part of those treaties are the obligations that the United States agreed upon to provide to Native nations for us for giving up our land and our water for the United States to expand and become what it is today. So as part of that agreement between the United States and tribal nations is that the United States has a treaty obligation to provide for the tribe's well-being, providing for health care, helping to ensure that our tribal children and our tribal people are educated. And so part of that that is boils down is it's a trust responsibility between the United States and tribal nations. And so I just want to, as a tribal individual, as a tribal member of my tribe, I'm acutely aware of the trust responsibility that the United States has, and that I will make sure that I will do everything that I can in my power as a United States Senator to make sure that the United States is being held up to the utmost of its responsibilities for tribal nations. Like I said, you look at right now, this current administration, with all of their cuts that they made, they're really kind of not meeting their obligations when it comes to working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, most tribes have a reservation office of Bureau of Indian Affairs. Depending on the population and size of the reservation, you could have, an estimated, 20, 30 Bureau of Indian Affairs employees. And then it goes to regional offices in our region. Our regional office is in Billings, Montana. And then it goes obviously to the national office, the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. Now, what happened was when streamlining everything here on my own reservation here at Fort Belknap, basically most of the Bureau of Indian Affairs employees were forced into early retirement, and we had approximately 20 Bureau of Indian Affairs employees, and now we have 2. We have the agency superintendent and an executive secretary, and so those 2 individuals are absorbing and having to take care of all of the other job responsibilities. And so that right there is a breach of trust responsibility right now by the federal government to the Fort Belknap Indian community. And I'm sure it's like that with, all the other tribal nations as well.
You get a chance to say anything that you would like. You could share your campaign website, anything that you would like. The floor is yours.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Again, my name is Michael Blackwolf. I'm an enrolled member of the Fort Belknap Indian community. I'm a member of the Gros Ventre tribe here in north central Montana. I'm also half Cree. My dad is from the neighboring Rocky Boys Indian Reservation. And, like I said, when I got into this race, I want to keep this as grassroots as possible. And so I'm really asking a lot of folks out there, to donate to my campaign. Like I said earlier, I'm trying not to, doing my best to avoid, taking large corporate money. And so this really is a grassroots campaign. If you folks want to, I have a donation link on my website. That's www.blackwolf4montana. Again, all spelled out, all lowercase, no dots, no hyphens. blackwolf4montana.com. You can check it out. I have my donation link to Act Blue on there. And any and all donations would be greatly appreciated. And quite honestly, I look forward to getting out and to start meeting with everyday Montanans here in the near future. And as I get out, one of the things that I promised that I would do is that I'm going to really, really start listening to what Montanans are going through, what Montanans need help with. And, I'm not going to show up to town hall meetings and, talk about I, me. I'm going to sit there. Obviously, they want to know what I'm going to do, what I want to do, and how I'm going to help them. But it's going to be a two-way street. I want to be able to, really have listening sessions at these town halls and to really hear what the Montanans are going through, what they're feeling, and any issues or problems that this administration has, any kind of hardships that that this administration has been putting on everyday hardworking Montanans. And so that's what I'm here for, everyday hardworking Montanans. I'm here for the tribal nations. I'm here for everybody, quite honestly. And I unabashedly, unashamedly say this is, quite honestly, I'm not here for the billionaires, and I'm not here for the ultra rich. They're well off as it is. They can go anywhere, do anything that they want. They don't have to worry about putting food on their table. They don't have to worry about rent. They don't have to worry about medical care or medical treatments. And so they're taken care of for their many lifetimes over. What I'm here for is those Montanans that just need that little bit of help. And there's more Montanans that need that help than there are ultra rich and billionaire people in Montana. And so with that, anybody can reach out. I believe there's my contact information on there. There's info at Black Wolf for Montana or Michael at blackwolfformontana.com. And I'll do the best I can to answer questions, or if anybody wants to invite me to any of their hometowns for town hall meetings, and I would gladly make sure that we get that on our schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwolf, for being on the program. That's the end of the interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
You as well.